create more measure which was just filed last Thursday. I was informed, Mr. President. Thank you.
And Mr. President, we should note that Senator Cayetano was the original author of the create measure, Mr. President. That's why stock knowledge is there, Mr. President.
So Minority Leader, it explains
Yes.
everything. That's why Senator Pia Cayetano is very much ready.
Correct.
And, thank you for not wasting our time.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the proper way of explaining why I'm standing here. I have two reasons. Number one, the Senate President messaged me, am I ready?
Okay.
And I'm always ready when my colleagues ask me to be ready. Yun, that has been my principle in the Senate. If they ask me to be ready and I have the capability of being ready, I will be ready. So on that note, I will not pretend to have read the 60 pages, but my very diligent team who was with me in the drafting and the finalization of the CREATE law diligently went through it, made a matrix, and so I am more or less aware of the major changes, and I'm hoping that by my making myself available now, I will help the minority and every other senator that is interested in this bill understand the differences. I have no desire to make it clear I'm not standing here to defend the original version of CREATE. I am standing here to ask questions. That is the purpose of interpellation. I am here to support a better measure, but I'm also here to point out from the data that I gathered then, I would be happy to share it with the sponsor and our colleagues if I have a different opinion on the treatment of the provisions that, according to the sponsor, requires a revisiting, either because of confusion of the rules or its inability to help us reach the desired outcome, which is more foreign investment and the like. So with that, I ask for the indulgence and permission of the sponsor to propound some questions.
I'll be more than happy to receive some questions from the original proponent of the CREATE measure, and I saw firsthand how Senator Pia, that time when she was launching this bill, was really hands-on and had to meet many stakeholders, including IPAs, and admittedly, the first version was the most difficult version. This version is just an enhancement building on that version, and the tug of war between the IPAs, the RBEs, even government is just tremendous, and I really appreciate the efforts by Senator Pia on crafting the first CREATE law, and yes, I will be more than happy to receive questions.
Thank you. And before I proceed, also on an administrative matter, I join the Minority Floor Leader in reiterating that our general rule is we give time to not just the minority, but to all the senators to read the measure first and to digest the sponsorship before questions are asked, because it's very difficult to even begin to ask questions when you're hearing a bill for the first time. That's why truly, if the minority leader would prefer that I do not ask questions, I'm very happy to sit down. But if the minority floor leader and the majority floor leader agree that my questions may help in the understanding and may help our colleagues either not ask more questions because I already asked the questions for them, or help them come up with more complicated questions. Either way, I'm happy to proceed, Mr. President.
Mr. President, 1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Yes, session suspended for 1 minute.
Mr. President, ready to resume.
Session resumes.
Mr. President, in view of a belated information given to this representation, Mr. President, I withdraw my previous motion to proceed with the interpellation, and I now move to recognize, to have the former Senate President be recognized to make a co-sponsorship speech with the indulgence of Senators Gatchalian and Cayetano, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, the motion of the majority leader is approved. We now recognize the good gentleman from Bukidnon, Senator Meg Subiri.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much, Mr. Majority Leader. Mr. President, I stand here today to co-sponsor a much-awaited Create More Act. I cannot help but think back to 2018 when we passed the Ease of Doing Business and Efficient Government Service Delivery Act during the time of former Senate President Coco Pimentel. At that time, it seemed that the EODB, or the Ease of Doing Business Act, would kickstart a new period of booming investments in the country. And indeed, in 2020, the Ease of Doing Business report of the World Bank, we climbed up an impressive 29 spots from the 95th place out of 190 economies on the global ranking for ease of doing business. Things were looking up, and then the pandemic happened, businesses scaled down or shut down, investments dried up, jobs disappeared, and the economy collapsed. And we essentially had to start all over again. And start over we did through the CREATE Act. We gave the business sector a big cut on corporate income tax to allow them to recover from the pandemic losses, keeping the businesses running and retaining their employees. But for all the good that CREATE did, the first CREATE, it also created a few problems that we were not able to foresee at the time, but now have a chance to correct through the Create More Act. In some interviews, Mr. President, I even said we made a mistake on the first CREATE, and I was being very honest about it. Foremost among this is the red tape that continues to hamper our business sector. To this day, despite the Ease of Doing Business Act, our bureaucracy remains a Byzantine maze that poses a challenge to foreign and local investors alike. What is the point of offering shiny incentive packages to draw investors in if we end up driving them away with our complicated bureaucracy anyways? That is why under the Create More Act, we are going to be streamlining our processes so investors are not bouncing around from agency to agency and submitting redundant piles of requirements, all towards an uncertain outcome. Case in point, through the Create More, we are addressing a problem that has led to many of our existing locators considering leaving for other countries. That is the lack of action on their VAT refund applications. Malaking bagay po ito, Mr. President, because companies like Itochu, these are giant companies. Itochu is the owner of Dole Philippines. Tayo pareho po tayo in Mindanao, Mr. President, Mr. Presiding Officer. And in our area of Mindanao, you know that it is Dole and Del Monte that are thriving in these areas, employing thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people. As a matter of fact, Dole has about 50,000 employees, half of which are in Bukidnon alone, Mr. President. They have been running into issues. For example, Itocho has been running into issues with the Bureau of Internal Revenue because of the massive delays and denials on their VAT refunds, which is an incentive that is available to them as foreign investors. With Itochu specifically, they've already lost 3.5 billion pesos in VAT refunds since 2018. Let me repeat, 3.5 billion pesos. And they have not received a single explanation for the delays and the denial. So they fear that they will not be unable to correct whatever BIR has found lacking in their documents and that their future applications will likely go the same way. Meaning, more money is lost in the pipeline. Mr. President, napakasimple lamang po ito. Nung wala pa yung CREATE, wala pa itong regime na ito, yung mga tax regime na ito, pag ikaw po ay exporter ng pinya, katulad ng Dole at Del Monte, pag in-export mo yan sa ibang bansa, papunta ng Japan, Korea, China, yan ay dapat VAT exempt. Lalong-lalo na yung mga kagamitan na ginagamit nyo dyan, katulad ng karton, yung mga crate, etc., etc. Dahil ine-export po yan, hindi po ginagamit local yan. Yung value-added tax system is supposed to be a tax when you purchase a goods in the localities, in the Philippines. Ito in-export po ninyo. Ang ginawa po ng BIR, under a series of laws, like such as CRATE, and prior to CRATE, it was TRAIN. Ang ginawa po nila ay VAT refundable na lang po. Hindi po siya VAT exempt. Alam naman po natin, Mr. President, the BIR is never in the business of refunding money. It is always in the business of collecting, getting money. Income yan. Kasi yung VAT refund, they consider as a revenue loss. Siyempre, kasi sasabihin nila, ito yung income natin ng buong taon. Kung i-refund po yan, mababawas po yung kanilang revenue targets para sa taon na yon. Kaya, ang nangyayari po na yon, ang itocho yung dole, pag nag-export po sila since 2017, I think nag-umpisa po to 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, hanggang 2020, until now, until 2023, pinapa-refund po nila yung alos 3.5 billion. Ito po yung mga karton, galing sa Davao. Davao will produce the cartons. They bring it to the farms in Bukidnon and in General Santos. They are packed in these boxes and they're exported. Now, all those boxes have to be VAT refunded. Hindi na automatic, wala ng VAT. So, ang laki pong nawawala po silang revenue dahil hindi po nare-refund ng BIR ito. At pag may problema pa, ang sabi po ng BIR sa kanila, take it to the tax court, yung CTA, Court of Tax Appeal. Alam naman po natin, Mr. President, aabot ng siyam-siyam yung mga kasong yun doon sa Court of Tax Appeals. So, my point is, these are decades-old investors. Matagal na po yan. Wala pa po ako sa bundong ito. Nandyan na po yung Del Monte, nandyan na po yung Dole sa Mindanao. They have brought so much growth to our industries. They have created so many jobs for our people. And under Dole alone, I stand corrected, there are 42,000 Filipinos under the employment. If they decide to scale down or worse, withdraw from the Philippines, then who will answer to those thousands of suddenly unemployed Filipinos? As well as matitiwangwang na po yung mga lupa dyan, alam naman po natin, pro na yan sa squatting, pro na yan sa away, land dispute, gulo na naman po yan. Alam po ni presiding officer po yan because he's from Mindanao. So, Create More, under this new Create More, and I want to thank the chairperson, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian. He took up the challenge to pursue this. We are going to streamline the VAT refund process. We now have a clear set timeline for the application and appeals process. We also have limited documentary requirements to only those mandated by law and specified in revenue issuances. And to address the issue of unexplained denials, we have required the written communication of assessed deficiencies of refund claims, including the legal and factual basis behind such denials. Alam niyo po, Mr. President, kung hindi po natin aayusin ito, at alam po ng ating sponsor yan, what's going to happen is, they will just import boxes. So your secondary industries na yung gumagawa ng paper, ng box, ng crate, mawawala na ng trabaho yan. Because it is easier to get bonded material, yung bonded, walang VAT yan, import mo dito yung box. Ilagay mo mga prutas sa loob, ilabas mo ulit, yun, tax exempt yun, walang VAT yun. Pero sino kawawa? Yung gumagawa ng karton, yung gumagawa ng crates, yung gumagawa po ng mga plastic na lalagyan ng mansanas o kung ano-ano, atis o ano pang tinalagay doon sa loob ng boxes for export. And most importantly, we have assigned the Department of Finance to process and refund applications in place of the BIR, as the task of assessing VAT refunds may run counter, as I mentioned earlier, Mr. President. It will run counter to the revenue collection mandated by the BIR. We have revenue targets to hit. After all, at ayaw po nila ma-erode yun. So now, we have a new system in place na DOF na po ang magpo-process ng VAT refund applications. The BIR will still audit medium and high-risk claims, but the power to grant the refund now rests with the Department of Finance, which will establish a VAT refund center within its revenue operations group that will handle the electronic processing and grant of cash refunds of creditable input tax. Excuse me. As of the timeline, we are keeping a strict 90-day period for the DOF to release its decisions on the application. The taxpayer then has a window of 15 days to file a request for reconsideration, and the DOF also has 15 days to act on this request. If the request is denied, or if the request is granted, but the BIR fails to act on the refund, then the taxpayer has 30 days to take up the case to the Court of Tax Appeals. With these clear timelines, we hope to put an end to VAT refund applications being unnecessarily dragged out, leaving our investors in limbo, wondering if they will ever see their money back. And Mr. President, nung pumunta po kami sa Japan, kasama ng malaking delegation, almost 9 senators, we even had the chance to meet with Prime Minister Kishida. Yan po ang bukang bibig nila sa atin, yung pag-amend ditong VAT regulations na ito. Dahil ipit na ipit daw yung mga Japanese investors, not only Itochu. Apparently, Mr. President, my dear colleagues, it wasn't only Itochu, it was also the makers of ball bearings in Cebu, kalimutan ko na isang grupo na yan, and the other chip manufacturers, kasi they buy the packaging here in the Philippines. They were saying, if we are going to follow the rules now of the BIR, then we will just import all this packaging from China or wherever. Kawawa po, maraming secondary industries na mamamatay dahil nga dyan sa problema na yan. And so, I'm very thankful that we're acting on this because when we went to Japan, yan talagang bukang bibig nila, when will we create to be able to address this problem of VAT refund for many Japanese manufacturers. Saka, Mr. President, ilan na lang po yung, alam mo, nagpa-briefing po kami sa Economic Affairs Committee ko. Last week, 60 to 70% of our economy is fueled by consumption. Ano pong ibig sabihin yan? Alam na alam po ng aking chairman kasi may vice chair, may Senator Gatchalian was there in the meeting. Ibig sabihin yan, 60 to 70% of OFW remittances ang ginagamit po ng taong bayan para mabuhay ang ekonomiya natin. Padala dito sa Pilipinas. Yan, ginagamit po nila. Pagdating sa bangko nila, mag-withdraw po sila. Punta po sila sa SM, punta sila sa Robinsons, mamili ng mga kagamitan, pumunta sa restaurant. Can you imagine that? You know how much percentage is on manufacturing? Less than 20%, I think. 16% was on manufacturing and has been declining steadily. In other words, our exports on manufacturing is getting smaller and smaller. So, what does it mean? We have a high GDP growth rate, one of the highest in Asia. But if you ask me, it's artificial. It's a GDP growth rate. We are growing. But if you ask me, it's not long-term. If something will happen in the world geopolitics, nagkagulo-gulo, hindi kaya magpadala ng OFWs ng remittances sa ating bansa, patay po tayong lahat. Patay. Even during the pandemic, what was keeping us alive was the padala ng mga OFWs sa kanilang mga pamilya. But if we lose that advantage, we have no exports, very little. Tourism is also still growing. So we have to make sure that we do not kill the goose that lays the golden egg. So we are clarifying the parameters of VAT exemption and VAT zero rating. In the CREATE Act, VAT zero rating was applied to purchases that are directly and exclusively used in the registered project or activity. This has always been a point of confusion among investors because there was no clear way to determine whether the input purchases were going to be creditable for VAT zero rating. That decision was all up to the BIR. Siyempre, kung tatanungin mo yung BIR, lahat yan batable. They get to decide what is directly used in the production process and what isn't. Incidental expenses on services like janitorial, security, accounting services were excluded. Never mind that these were completely necessary in keeping the business running. With Create More, we are now changing the language from directly and exclusively to directly attributable, meaning registered export enterprises with high-value domestic market enterprises can now get VAT zero rating on incidental expenses. Malaking bagay po yan. Create More further allows high-value domestic market enterprises to avail of non-income tax-based incentives. They are entitled to VAT exemption on importation and VAT zero rating on local purchases when their investment capital exceeds 20 billion or their export sales in the immediately preceding year amounts to at least $100 million. In the past 2 years, the administration has been doing a fantastic job in selling the country as a rising investment hotspot in Southeast Asia. And when I was Senate President, I had the opportunity and honor to represent, together with the President, in many of these business trips abroad. And it has been paying off, Mr. President. Maraming nag-pledge. According to NEDA, during the economic briefing that they gave us last week, there was an 18.7% increase in pledges for net foreign direct investments between January to April 2023 and January to April of this year. But remember po, yung pledges, pangako yun. Yung pangako, pwede mapako. Kailangan talaga pumasok dito, nag-groundbreaking, nag-ribbon cutting, para naman bumuelo po ang ating manufacturing and exports in the country. So, if you ask many businessmen, Mr. President, they're still on a wait and see with this Create More. Wait and see pa rin sila kasi hindi pa nila alam kung ano talagang mangyayari sa kanila. There is still a considerable gap between pledges versus actual investments that have come in. But on the whole, there has been an increase and we appear to be on the right track. But we do not want to just keep attracting new investors. We have to keep the existing investors who are already here, who have already poured billions into the country, like Itochu and other manufacturing companies. Besides, what better way to attract new investors than to show them how happy our old investors are to be here? Siyempre, Mr. President, kung malungkot po yung investors na nandito na yon, sino papasok dito? Kasi lahat po sila representative of their foreign chambers. Eh magkikwento sila na huwag kayo pumasok dito, malungkot dito, masama yung tax regime, masama yung bureaucracy sa ating bansa. Matatakot po sila. If interested investors see giants like Dole thinking of relocating elsewhere, then we have shot ourselves in the foot. We are not only losing long-time investors, we're losing potential ones as well. And ultimately, the biggest loser will be the Filipino people, because this will mean less opportunities for local suppliers, less interest in regional development, and less jobs overall. So I hope with the Chamber's support in passing this measure, it will help us create more and create better opportunities for our people. So, yun lamang po, Mr. President. Mabuhay po ang ating Republika ng Pilipinas. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Senator Suberi, for a very good co-sponsorship speech.
Thank you, sir.
You can just imagine if Dole and Del Monte will shut down their operations in Mindanao. Again, it will open up a very fertile ground for
Rebellion, mga
recruitment
rebelde.
again from the
Opo,
CPP and
yes.
PA.
Opo, armed
Instead of
groups.
recently, Bukidnon, South Cotabato, and provinces of Davao region
Yes.
are declared as insurgency-free provinces. Tapos magkakaroon na ganito ng problema, sigurado.
Yes.
Lalakas naman ang recruitment yan.
Tsaka,
Problema
Mr.
na naman tayo.
President, hindi lamang po ito, tama po kayo, hindi lamang ito Bukidnon, hindi lamang ito General Santos. Sa Davao regions din, dahil ang number one complaints are the banana and pineapple manufacturers kasi po yung binibilan nga nila na packaging, dati VAT exempt yun, dahil ina-export po yan. Ngayon, binabat na, so pati sila umaaray na. Yung mga Pilipinong may-ari nito mga kumpanya, umaaray din po. So you're absolutely correct. It may bring back insurgency to these areas.
Most of the box companies are coming from Davao City and Davao del Norte.
That's correct, sir.
Yeah, so a lot of, it will cause another unemployment in those
Hundreds of
provinces.
thousands of jobs. Kasi kung Itochu lamang po, 42,000 na. Alam ko sa Del Monte, they have 50,000 employees. That's already 92,000. Plus ito yung mga manufacturers of these boxes and containers and pallets. Hundreds of thousands will lose their job. Salamat po, Mr. President.
Thank you for taking the cudgels for our people in Mindanao.
But, Mr.
Thank you,
President,
Major-
just in response. But, Mr. President, I thank Senator Zubiri for introducing this representation to Dole Philippines. When he was our Senate President, he took a proactive role in making sure that our current investors are being treated well and their issues are being addressed. Tama ho si Senator Zubiri, kung yung mga current investors natin hindi masaya, wala hong pupunta ho sa atin kahit anong incentives ang bibigay ho natin. So, Dole Philippines became our primary resource person. In fact, they were present in all of our meetings, and in the 7 recommendations that they gave this representation, we adopted 6 of them. The other one is the requested VAT exemption for importation. Baka hindi na ho sila magtanim ng saging ho dito, mag-import na lang ho ng saging, so we didn't accept that. But all the other 6 recommendations, we adopted it. One of which is what Senator Zubiri mentioned, that as long as you are an exporter, you will enjoy VAT zero rating on all your purchases here in the country. So you don't have to pay VAT on boxes, VAT on pallets, all of that VAT zero rated na ho siya. Basta exporter ka ho, meaning you bring out your products for your entire time, I mean, for the rest of your exporting activity duration. No? So yun po yung introduction na pinasok ho natin. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, good sponsor. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I renew my previous motion and move to recognize the sponsor, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, and to interpellate Senator Pia Cayetano. So move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objections, you can continue. Senator Pia Cayetano is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the indulgence of the sponsor, as I said, I just have clarificatory questions to understand some of the changes that were introduced. And I will also be happy to share my recollection of the basis for some of the provisions of the CREATE law.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So I'll start with the income tax rate. Is it my understanding that under the Create More bill, that the income tax rate will now be 20% for all domestic corporations? And to be clear, currently under the Create law, it's 25%, and only domestic corporations that have a net taxable income not exceeding 5 million and with total assets not exceeding 100 million that could avail of 20%. So currently it's at 25, and only this subgroup with those that meet those conditions avail of 20. But the proposal now is that all the domestic corporations will only pay 20%, at least for domestic.
No, Mr. President. We retain the 20% for corporations not exceeding 5 million, and then we also retain the 25% for corporations not exceeding 5 million. So that's
So that is not changed.
No, that has not changed, Mr. President.
So what companies what changed as far as domestic corporations are concerned?
Can you bring your Ayan. Ito pala. Okay. The only here pala. The only change that we made or enhancement that we made, if you are a registered business enterprise under enhanced deduction, you will now pay only 20%.
But it's an option. It is an option if you avail of the enhanced deduction.
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay. So
Yeah,
I will
correct.
repeat. So basically, pag ordinary corporation ka, di ka registered, kahit sinong mga nagtatayo ng negosyo, you are at 25%. That has not changed.
Yes, Mr.
Yeah.
President. If your net taxable income is above 5 million.
Yeah, above 5 million and your total asset do not exceed. So that you
Yes.
carve that out to avail of 20. So that does not change.
Correct.
Okay. The reason I ask is because during the CREATE debates, our now Secretary of Finance was already pushing for that
Yeah,
20%
yeah. I
to be
remember.
available to
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
So at
Yeah,
the time, it seems like such a long time ago
Yeah.
because the pandemic alters our perception of time. But we were at 30%, and then the original CREATE committee report was 1% deduction only per year, if His Honor
Yeah,
recalls.
I remember.
But then, at the last moment, and this is really how things work, our Secretary of Finance then felt very generous because tapusin na natin to. Huwag na kayo magpagtalo sa 1,000 amendments nyo. Nabigay yung 5%, it went down from
Yeah.
from 30 to 25. That is
Yeah.
the history.
Correct.
So we're at 25. So akala ko naman ngayon, biglang bumaba na lahat sa 20%. Hindi
No,
naman.
no,
So
Mr. President.
generally, everybody will pay 25% except for this same group of people under the CREATE law na, yun nga, hanggang 5 million lang ang total asset, ang income, and not exceeding 100 million. That doesn't change.
Correct.
But what is introduced is there are registered enterprises that may avail of enhanced deduction
Correct.
instead of yung standard percentage na
SIT.
SCIT.
Yes.
Then sila rin pwedeng mag-avail ng 20%.
Yes.
So
Mr.
I would say for the general population, status quo.
Yes,
Okay.
correct, Mr. President.
So that's clear. I have
that's
no
correct.
argument with that.
And I remember,
leave
Mr.
that-
President, I remember during that time, I was listening to the interpellation, the intention of Secretary Recto was to promote or assist MSMEs. That's why we introduced 20% for corporations with net taxable income not exceeding 5%. So there's a sort of a progressivity in that
Yes.
sense.
And
Mr.
if
President.
I may add, because this will help us whenever we revisit, and hopefully we don't revisit too much, because I think it adds to the confusion, but I think it's our job to revisit if it will make
Yeah.
business better for all, provide jobs. So to add to the history here is that the data was shown, and I don't know if my team has it readily available so we can share it, that we have one of the highest income tax rate, corporate income
Correct.
tax rate in the region.
Yeah,
And that's why even at 25, we are still fairly high.
Yes, Mr.
So-
President, that's correct, Mr.
So
President.
in as much as I'm happy to show my support for the chairman's committee report on this point, wala bang move to make it even lower? Kasi nga, I recall that we were still on the higher end. So I will be now the Senator Recto, but I don't intend to be Secretary of Finance in 3 years. I don't. I'm not trying to get your job, Senator Recto. Secretary Recto. Wala bang move to lower this further?
But Mr. President, we studied the different corporate income taxes of Southeast Asia, and we'll flash on the slide. We're almost at parity or almost at equilibrium compared with our other neighbors, except for Singapore, who charges 17% on CIT, but the rest are almost the same. No? Thailand at 20%. We'll flash it on the slide.
Eh, 25 nga tayo, so we're not the same.
25
Because only
for-
a small...
Yeah, 25 for large corporations, 20% for small MSMEs, Mr. President. So,
But may I ask, just so as His Honor clarifies this further, yung comparison natin with
Yeah.
other countries, the chart I have is a little bit different, mas colorful yung sa akin. Pero this kasi shows that 4 countries, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Laos are at 20. Is that what you have?
well, we only looked at the major economies of Southeast Asia, Mr. President, but we'll take a
O,
look at that
sige.
also, Mr.
Pero,
President.
for example, Mr. President, sige,
Yeah.
so at least,
Mr. President, since majority of the corporations are considered small and medium, we're almost at equilibrium at 20%, Mr. President. So the big corporations, those are above 5 million net taxable income, will be charged 25%, Mr.
But
President.
I think, Mr. President, and I appreciate that you make a distinction between MSMEs and tama ba? MSMEs and large corporations, because that's really the whole picture.
Yeah.
But our discussion is about bringing in foreign direct investment. So then, for that purpose of this discussion, we're looking at the big corporations.
Yes.
So for purpose of the big corporations, ang intindi ko sa data is mataas tayo because Thailand and Vietnam are at 20 and tayo nasa 25 pa rin. And then to add to your slide, kasi wala dyan, yun nga, it's Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Laos. They're all offering 20. So that's competing with us because tayo talaga, ang default natin is 25.
Yep.
And then Indonesia, which is a huge economy and also a competitor, is at 22.
But Mr. President, those who are going to apply as a registered business, so meaning they can also enjoy other incentives, but
Yes.
also enjoy the 20%, Mr. President. So if they elect to
True.
be
Correct.
enhanced deduction, Mr.
Correct
President.
naman, correct. But it's not our default.
It's not our
It's
default.
not our
You have
default,
to you have to
yeah.
apply for,
Yeah.
if you're part of the SIPP, you apply for it, and then you can enjoy a suite of different investments, Mr. President.
Does-
Incentives, Mr.
Does
President.
His Honor know, or can DOF tell us what seems to be the choice, the preference of foreign companies now to avail of this enhanced deduction wherein they can get 20% or the SCIT, which is yung percentage ng sales nila. Kasi kung tama yung tanda ko, gusto nila yung percentage kasi simple lang.
Yes.
Wala nang
Yeah.
ipapakita pang maraming
Correct.
deduction. So hindi rin sila pupunta dito sa
Yeah.
20%.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. The choice is special corporate income tax,
Yes.
Mr. President, because it's easy to compute. It's 5%, 3% to national, 2% to local, and then all you have to establish is your cost of sales, Mr. President. So after that, you can already pay your 5%. And yeah. Ano yung effective rate na kasi? And based from the FIRB, the choice of our exporter is to avail of SCIT, Mr. President. So that's because it's easy to compute. Once you establish your cost of sale, you have your gross income, and everything is easy to compute already.
Yeah. Well, anyway, before I move on to my next point, if I recall correctly, Senator Joel Villanueva, Senator Risa Hontiveros were among the two. There may have been more, but I think I recall correct. I hope I recall correct, is the two of them were pointing out that if mabababa sa 20% lahat or kung ano mang ibababa, then the savings, so kunyari, ngayon 25% ang default natin. If I insist na gawing 20% yun, yung savings na 5%, magamit sana ng mga corporations para sa mga benefit packages sa mga laborers. I think the two senators were quite consistent with their position on that. No, I think Senator Risa's nodding, so I'm correct. Senator Joel, I think, is in the back and probably not listening to me right now, but I think that was his position also. So anyway, I'm posing that there for the body to consider, because I may make it a formal proposal. Do you know, does the sponsor know offhand ano yung law sa government if we make our default 20% for all corporations?
We'll get that
We'll
number,
compute, yeah.
Mr. President.
And then if not, ano yung 22?
Yes, we'll
or
get that
ano yun,
number,
yeah.
Mr. President. Well, Mr.
I
President,
just want Secretary Ralph Recto to be getting a taste of his medicine. These are the questions he asked me repeatedly, and if I'm not mistaken, I think a record 9 times on the floor. So,
but Mr.
No,
President, just to add to the discussion, the effective tax rate for enhanced deduction regime is 18%. So, and
sorry,
then
can you say that again?
18%.
No, what, the whole I didn't hear the statement.
The effective tax rate.
Okay.
So, so meaning when you use ED because you have deductibles.
Oo.
And then when you minus all those deductibles and then use the corporate income tax, your effective tax rate is about 18.4%. For special corporate income tax, is about 8.3%. So in other words, if you apply for incentives and those incentives are applied to your businesses, your effective tax rate for enhanced deduction is only 18% versus those who are not registered businesses. For special corporate income tax is about 8.3%, Mr. President. So mababa siya because we have
Correct.
additional deductions along the way.
So i-summarize na natin to before we move on to a next topic. The default tax rate is 25% para sa lahat, hindi nagbabago yon.
Yeah.
Create more, same.
Yes.
But under create more, yung 20% pwede ngayon ma-avail ng both domestic and foreign corporations if they are registered enterprises, and they will particularly choose yung enhanced deduction.
Yes, Mr.
But to be clear, sino ang pwedeng maging registered enterprises? Kasi nga, kaya nga ang default natin is 25. Hindi ka basta-basta pwede.
Correct,
Hindi naman ako pwede pumunta sa DOF o kung sa DTI or kung saan mga investment IPA. I can't go to any IPA and just say, register me. You have to have qualifications, right? So
Correct.
basically, hindi para sa lahat
Yes.
para makuha yon, di ba? It takes a certain status
Yeah.
na ma-avail mo yung sinasabi mong effectively 18% or 8%.
Yeah.
Okay.
We didn't change, Mr. President, we didn't change the qualification to apply to become a registered business. Under the CREATE, you should be within the strategic investment priorities plan. So that remains intact. So if I'm a business and my business is inside the strategic SIPP, the strategic investment priorities plan, I can avail of incentives.
You led me to my next question, Mr. President.
It's a good segue.
I appreciate what you're saying na hindi nyo binago yung general rule na kailangan kang maging pasok sa SIPP, that is the Strategic Investment Priority Plan, bago ka maka-avail ng incentives.
Yes, correct.
Pero, Mr. President, ang napakalaking binago nyo ay under CREATE, the SIPP is prepared by national government. BOI or FIRB?
BOI.
BOI. Now, under Create More, you introduce this concept na may local SIPP at may national SIPP. Meaning, ang isang, and I'm not so clear what local means. Does it mean isang city? Does it mean isang province? Does it mean isang region? They can come up with their own strategic investment priority plan, which could be very different from their neighbor, which could be offering different. So my staff is clarifying that it's the IPA that will create. And
Yes.
I must say and put on record that one of the main reasons for Create is that iba-iba na yung mga offering ng mga IPA. And even for investors, parang hindi na nila alam kung saan sila pupunta. And I thought the one of the goal was to be like a one-stop shop, and yet you will go to different IPAs in different regions, and they'll have different offerings. And now they can even, we've now actually legitimized that they will, dati kasi they're not officially allowed, I think. They're not really officially mandated to have their own. But now, we legitimized it. So it's very confusing to me because I was made to believe that the source of confusion for many investors is this different treatments of IPAs. And now we're legitimizing it. Pinapayagan natin, sinabi natin na pwede ka ngayon magkaroon ng local SIPP.
SIPP.
So maybe His Honor can help me understand this new concept.
Correct. Well, Mr. President, just as a background, the SIPP, or now in this law, what we call national SIPP, is created by the Board of Investments, and they usually consult with the IPAs. No? So meaning, for example, what will form part of the different tiers, what are the businesses that will create value for the nation. So, and they come up with an SIPP.
Correct,
And those
correct.
businesses who are within that SIPP can enjoy incentives. During the consultation, the IPAs made a very strong case of laying down that not all IPAs have the same strengths and weaknesses. I'll give you a very specific example. IPAs that are located in the eastern seaboard, for example, CESA, APECO, this type of IPAs have very different strengths and very different weaknesses compared to their counterparts, let's say, in Bataan, in Angeles, in Clark, or in Subic. And they have very unique offerings there. For example, agriculture, cold storage, fisheries, so this kind of businesses. But more often than that, this type of businesses are not part of the national SIPP because the national SIPP generalizes that all IPEs are the same, regardless of their location and regardless of their geography. So we tried to come up with a mechanism to harness the potential of that IPA because of their unique geographical location. So that's the rationale why we created what we call a local SIPP. But the local SIPP will not be a document that will be created out of thin air. It will be consulted with the BOI. It will also follow the same principles and standards of the national. So it will be in line with the national SIPP in terms of standards and criteria. So that's the whole rationale, because there are a lot of cases that the national SIPP does not capture the local situation because it's created nationally. It's created here in Metro Manila. And that alienates the potential of particular IPAs. For example, in Zamboanga, they're also very strong there in halal products or products that they can export in Muslim countries, but that's not part of the national SIPP, Mr. President. And the national SIPP cannot capture those local nuances. That's the reason why we included a local SIPP.
I understand, Mr. President, and I am not necessarily opposed to it. I understand the importance of our IPAs that are precisely trying to build the economies in far-flung areas, in rural areas. I recognize that. I think my concern now would be they have the authority to create their own SIPP. And if I understand the way the bill is crafted, it's just with the guidance of BOI. So I think we all know that that can be very tricky because, well, that was precisely, I mean, I can share verbatim position papers, concerns of DOF. In fact, some of the people in DOF before are probably still there on why this would not be an ideal situation. I understand that it should reflect the strengths of the local area. It should be able to make an offering that harnesses the talents of the region. So like you said, good example, yung halal food in the Mindanao areas. But if it's just with the guidance of BOI, baka parang tayo maging chapsuy na chapsuy, Mr. President. Is that common in other countries na kanya-kanya ang iba-ibang IPAs in other countries? Because I know that time and again, one of our concerns is maayos na gagawa sa ibang bansa, bakit sa atin hindi? So, may ganun ba sa ibang bansa na given full authority ang IPA to come up with their own SIPPs?
Mr. President, what we are very strict on is the standards and criteria. That's why we didn't change that in the law.
You did not change that,
We
the
didn't
tiering
change
system,
that. So
okay?
they will, for example, they will in section 300 of CREATE, Strategic Investment Priorities Plan, the local SIPP will still follow the criteria set forth. For example, priority projects or activities that are included in the Philippine Development Plan. So dapat na Philippine Development Plan pa rin siya, or its equivalent, or other government programs taking into the account the following. So the standards are still the same, Mr. President. So it's not going to be just left to the IPA to create. They still have to follow the national standards set forth in the law, Mr. President. So that it will not be unwieldy and it will not be without any rhyme or reason. So we want to make sure that we give them flexibility in capturing their local strengths and their local nuances, but at the same time following the standards set by the law, Mr. President.
This point I will have to defer and discuss further with His Honor.
Yes, Mr. President.
But before I do that, I'll put this on record so that your team can also understand where my concern is coming from, no? So, I wish I had visual so everyone can understand. I don't though. So, but just to be clear, the way Create Law was crafted, and as His Honor is saying, it's the same, hindi naman binago. May Tier 1, Tier 2,
Yes,
Tier 3.
correct.
So the more incentives are given to Tier 3. Tama ba? Tier
Yes,
3,
Mr.
right?
President.
Tier 3 yung marami. So, and what is Tier 3? Tier 3 yung mga gustong-gusto natin na kinds of activities, yung science, research and development. Ito yung
Innovation.
tinatawag na
Value added, Mr.
value
President.
added talaga. Higher productivity, breakthroughs in science and health, high-paying jobs. So you really want to incentivize that because, again, if we look back at history, there's a natural direction that countries follow when they start, let's say they start with farming, then they start with very basic processing. Very basic, yung literally yung farm products mo, lalagay mo sa bote. Napaka-basic. Pero after that, yung products na yon na modify yan using science and technology and so on and so forth. So nagiging more high value. So the more high value, that is what we want. And that is precisely why we're trying to give more incentives talaga to these higher values. I remember it was a very difficult discussion, but the jobs that, and by all means no disrespect to the very decent and the decent work, no, that women do, because it's when women go out of the homes and work for their families, they're able to put their kids into school. And so a lot of these women who were able to bring their kids to send their kids to college worked in the market, worked as laborers in a factory sewing, talagang very basic. Hindi nila kailangan na nakapag-aral sila, pero through their hard work, naangat nila yung, di ba, yung kabuhayan ng family. What we want to offer now is the same set of hardworking women and men to have higher skills and making use of, yun nga, science and technology, innovation, and to get better paid, di ba? Same amount of work but better paid. No one will argue with that, right? And that's why ang ini-incentivize na nga natin is itong more complex type of work.
Yes.
So that is where the problem lies, because I think we have anecdotal data that shows that the IPAs can look the other way and grant something like a Tier 3 status for something that is maybe just a Tier 2. And that's why when I defended the Create Law, the idea was to ensure na it's a tight ship. You know, may nagbabantay. Yun yung problema ko ngayon kasi,
Yeah.
Mr. President,
I-
paulit-ulit na dinikdik sa utak ko yun na
Yeah.
walang nagbabantay. So hindi na natin alam kung ano yung potential na papasok dahil wala nang reporting. Sila ang nanliligaw, sila ang magagrant. So wala nang magbabantay. So we're back to square one, unfortunately, Mr. President. I would like to believe that, of course, I do believe that the IPs have the best interests of their constituents, the people but yung pangkalakihan ba na
Yeah.
picture? And His Honor understands, no?
Yeah.
His Honor is nodding. So what is the check and balance there?
Yeah,
I don't need an answer now, but that is the concern.
Yeah.
Sayang lang kasi, like, taon ko to,
Yeah.
sinubukang ipaliwanag sa ating
Yeah.
lahat, and whether I convinced everybody or not, we had the majority vote, then we're back to that.
Yeah.
And if it's a better system, I'm so happy to support.
Yeah.
But if it's not, it's kind of sad.
Yeah. Actually, we're not completely going back to the old system. I do agree with the with the good gentle lady from Taguig that we need discipline in the giving out of incentives. And that's why in the first Create FIRV was reborn. It was an old office, and
Agency,
it
yeah.
was reborn
Small.
and added a lot of powers in order to instill discipline among IPAs. And that concept remains the same. And I believe in that. Personally, I believe in that concept because I remember during the debate, His Honor raised that race to the bottom concept wherein all the IPAs nagpapatayan sila just to get
Yeah,
crumbs
yeah.
from the business sector. So I remember that. That's why we preserved and maintained the concept of discipline in the bill, but added a feature to enable the IPAs to have to have some say in terms of what businesses they can give incentives to without going out of the standards and the criteria. In fact, in the tier one, the different tiers in the law, we did not touch that, and they have to comply with the different tiers in the law as well. So the standards, they have to comply in the crafting of their local SIPP. The criteria, they have to comply with in the crafting local SIPP. Also in the different tiers that promotes different types of businesses in the law, they have to comply with as well. So in other words, the framework is intact, but we're just giving them the opportunity to create their own. This is also optional on their part, to create their own local SIPP within that framework.
Well, what I'll do next time, Mr. President, is I'll come up with scenarios, no? So we can test
That
and
concept.
see if it's cohesive, no? If it's
Correct.
because I don't think it benefits us in the long run. Na yun nga, race to the bottom, di ba?
Oh, I remember that also,
Parang
and I don't
na-
agree with that.
Like ito, naawa din ako. Tuwan-tuwa ako, like, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, na ang laki ng income, additional income ng mga stay-at-home moms at saka ng mga teacher kasi nag-tutor sila. So, I don't know kung mga foreigners yung tutor nila, I don't know kung 1,000 an hour, tapos bumaba, 750, 500, 250, 200. But, I mean, of course, that's supply and demand. We can't really control that. But I don't want that to happen, no? Because parang ang babaw na, you know, we may be worth more than that, and we really want the quality
Yes, definitely.
companies to come
That's why
in.
we didn't touch the standards, because the standards are well written, it's very detailed. So as long as you comply within that standards, you can craft your own local SIPP. But the local SIPP should conform to all of those criteria in the law.
I think for me, and I'll leave it on this note because I know that there are other matters on the agenda, there must be some kind of submission.
Yeah.
And because again, we confuse the investors if sabi, oh sige, sinubmit, tapos after 120 days, half a year, or 1/3 of the year, ni-reject. Di ba? Parang, syempre, andun na yung investor, ready na sila,
Yeah,
nag-recruit
yeah,
na
yeah.
sila ng mga foreign managers nila or foreign CEOs. That's not what I want.
Yeah,
But,
that's true.
But then if our structure is not stable enough, you know, if our economy can, the demands, the situation that presents itself on the ground is so vulnerable to compromising the standard, then I'm just a little bit worried that then we look back in 5 years, 10 years, and we'll be like, you know, we weren't able to those standards were not upheld. Because I know His Honor does intend to respect the standards that were put in place, but if they're not upheld, then we're back. Then in that sense, ginulo natin yung market, and I think we all agree we don't want that for
Yes,
our
yes, I agree.
investors. So like I said, I leave it at that. I'm happy to. I definitely will continue, but I'm also happy to give way if there are others who are ready. But I'll just be asking a few more clarificatory questions on the major points that I took note have been somehow amended or revised or maybe even taken out. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah,
President.
thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pia, Senator Win. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, there being no other member who wishes to interpolate at this moment, Mr. President, I move that we suspend the period of interpellation, Mr. President.
Any objection?
Mr. President,
Yes.
Mr. President, Senator Cayetano is taking the floor and would like to
Mr. President,
Senator
Majority Leader,
submit a manifestation.
with the permission of Senator Gatchalian, sa akin manifestation lang, sa kanya yung interpellation, just to give a little bit contribution dun po sa discussion, sa diskurso po ngayon. With your permission, Mr. President, Mr. Sponsor, I would like to congratulate Senator Gatchalian in advance. Alam kong priority to, kailangan na kailangan ito. On one hand, when we talk about business, it's like the goose that lays the golden eggs, or dahil tagig at pateros kami, the duck that lays the golden eggs. But the first point I'd like to make is that we should find a way to discuss everything holistically and comprehensively. So for example, when we talk about divorce, we also have to talk about strengthening marriages. When we talk about the SOGI bill and the concerns of the LGBT community, which we should do, we should also talk about other communities and about comprehensively preventing discrimination. So ganun din po, when we talk about incentives, taxation, kailangan din natin pag-usapan yung income ng gobyerno and yung public service na kaakibat nito. But kailangan din natin pag-usapan, katulad ng sinabi ni Senator Pia at nung iba natin mga senador, yung mga workers natin. So, for example, on that point, parati natin sinasabing, don't kill the goose or the duck that lays the golden eggs. Pero, yumayaman ng yumayaman, yung may-ari ng duck who lays the golden eggs. Pero yung nag-aalaga ng duck, pahirap ng pahirap. So, makikita naman natin yung grinant na additional wage hike ng mga regional wage board. Napakaliit. I-compare natin, in-approve ngayon yung tranche para sa gobyerno. Kung makikita mo, halos hindi mabubuhay talaga yung hindi living wage ang ating minimum wage, no? So again, I don't want to delay this bill. I'm just saying that sana mapag-usapan din natin yung ano ba ang tamang amount na hindi rin naman tutumba o manilugi yung mga negosyo. Pero at the same time, yung ating mga laborers, mga workers, kumita ng living wage. Ganun din, for example, no, kung tinitignan ko yung chart kanina, Singapore, Philippines, tayo pinakamataas ang tax rate kasi tayo din ang pinakamalakas sa lagayan eh. So 25% nga ang kinuha ng gobyerno, ang dineclare mo naman kalahati lang. O edi 12.5% lang binayad mo. O siyempre, ayaw din ng negosyo yon. So what's my point now? I mean, talk to any businessman now. Reklamo sa BIR. Suko na nga sila dun sa wag magkalagayan eh. Pero ang sabi nila, sana naman predictable. Sana naman hindi every year. No? So from the first day that I entered Congress in the 11th Congress, pinag-uusapan din dyan yung side nung paano natin bigyan ng tamang sweldo ang mga taga-customs, taga-BIR, pero paano din tanggalin ang corruption doon. Kasi nga, yung mga charts na yan, my favorite quotation about statistics, Mr. President, is this quotation na sinabing, statistics is like a bikini. What it shows is revealing, but what it hides is essential. No? So, makikita mo, as usual po, si Senator Sherwin lang ang natatawa. Hindi ko alam kung dahil hindi ako nakakatawa o siya lang ang mabilis ang pick-up. But I think he gets my point dahil pamilya din sila ng negosyante. No? So I'm not pointing fingers here now na kasi may mga negosyanteng corrupt o kaya kasi may corruption sa BIR. Wala namang perfect eh. That's why inaayos natin sistema. But yun nga ang point ko. And going to the last 2 points, customs naman, no? Kung titignan mo yung goods na lumalabas sa China, ay halos doble doon sa statistics ng pumapasok sa Pilipinas. So kung sasabihin mong ang tinax ng Pilipinas is $1 billion worth of goods, ang lumabas ng China, 1.8 o 2 billion eh. Yun yung statistic eh. Nagbabago minsan, pero hindi natin ma-solve. So kung sasabihin natin, yung VAT, mataas na tayo, 12%. Kasi actually, yung ibang bansa, tinataas na nila VAT ngayon eh. Pero kung sila naman, navavat kasi katulad ng Singapore, natatax nila lahat eh. At walang nagrereklamo na hinihingan sila. So whether customs yun, VAT or income tax, no? Then my last point naman is, I really get yung examples ni Senator Gatchalian, but if he can forgive me, total, mas matanda ako sa kanya in age, at mas matanda din naman ako sa kanya sa politika, since 1992 pa ako sa konsehal, then 98 naging congressman. Nag-umpisa yan na maganda intensyon na yung mga sulok-sulok ng Pilipinas o hindi highly urbanized, magkaroon ng incentive. Di ba? EPSA pa nun, tapos naging PESA. And then syempre, ang nangyari, kung mas malakas ang boses mo dahil may senador ka o may secretary ka, may Senate President ka, may speaker ka, nag-create din ng economic zone sa lugar nila. So lumaki ngayon yung incentives dun sa mga lugar na yon, yung iba mong binanggit. So, di ba, I remember yung kay Senator Ed Angara, sabi ko sa kanya, Tito Ed, bakit APECO ang tawag mo sa APECO? Hindi naman sila naape. In fact, mas malaki nga incentives nyo kaso dun sa iba. So yung lobbying, kung ano na sa national list at saka na sa local list, normal yon. Kasi lahat gusto talaga eh. So ngayon may national SIPP. Kung lalagyan natin ng local SIPP, ang concern ko doon, magiging sip-sip na. Kasi may national ka na, may local ka na, so lahat si sip-sip. Sinong pagbibigyan natin? So there are no easy answers because tama yung mga, but while you were talking, ginugel ko lang ha, yung halal industry is now $2 trillion. $2 trillion. And it is estimated that in a few months or in a year or so, umabot ng $2.8 trillion. Hindi lang to pagkain, pati yung mga makeup and everything. No? So, anong point ko doon, Mr. President? Ang point ko, hindi dapat local na ang sumipsip doon o mag-SIPP. Dapat naman siguro alam ng BOI na ang halal ay dapat functional. But that doesn't downgrade any of your other examples. No? So let me just manifest that. I will try to keep my interpellation short dahil lahat 23 tayo, lahat tayo may tanong. But sana po, pag nagginawa nating urgent ito, urgent din yung concerns na paano natin maayos na may kumpiyansa at walang lagayan sa BIR. Paano din natin siguraduhin na tumaas din ang sweldo ng ating mga laborers, etc. That's not on my good friend Senator Gatchalian. That's on all of the rest of us. And I think we all agree naman on that. So I'm not saying let's hold this bill and not do that. I'm just saying may mga umaangal, bakit hindi pa natin dinidiscuss yung divorce? Because nga, we should also discuss how to strengthen marriage. May umaangal, bakit hindi natin dinidiscuss yung SOGI at ganyan? Well, I'm not saying that there's one reason. I'm just saying there is a tendency now to take out that urgent issue, but not to discuss everything holistically. And we're all equally guilty. So baka dito sa Create More, we can, look at all these other concerns that our esteemed colleagues have put forward these issues. So thank you very much, Mr. Majority Leader, and thank you, good sponsor, for that. I'll try to limit my interpellation to specific issues.
Thank you, Senator Alan,
Mr.
for
President,
your
Deputy
presentation.
Minority Leader is seeking the floor for a manifestation, brief manifestation, remain to the current issue.
Senator Hontiveros.
Senator Ontiveros is seeking the floor.
Mr.